Cool.
This is a big one for Lachy.
So I realized when I got home, I forgot to bring all of my props. So I kind of made one, and then I don't have the original one, but we can imagine. But I've got two of the most recent air assemblies from Rock Shox. Both of these are for pike. Having a brain space. It's either a pike or a lyric. It's irrelevant either way. The original one is probably like 4 or 5 years old now, so you probably don't see a lot of them. But these were the ones that had like the massive upgrades. So they're both of them there. They are actually the same. Well, for the same travel, these aren't the same travel. These are the ones I just had at home, but they are actually the same shaft length. What changes is the internals. But so when it came out with the original Debonair, which is what everyone went gangbusters for in the upgrade, and it came on the lyriks that were red, was the negative spring increase. So before, your negative spring was just between these two seals. And on the older air assemblies, this was quite small, and they made it just like a little bit bigger in terms of space. And that was kind of all they could do, because once it crosses the dimple inside the fork, it can't be any bigger. If it's sitting over the dimple, which is what puts air in the negative spring, it won't be able to equalize. So there's only a finite amount of space that this can physically be from seal to seal. So what they did with the original Debonair was they introduced this foot nut, and then underneath the piston head up here, it's actually hollowed out. So the air would go into the shaft of the air assembly. So this like doubled the negative air volume. What that does on your air spring curve, if I had a whiteboard, I do have a whiteboard, but it's hard to get out. What that does is on an air spring, you kind of have zero breakaway when you have a negative spring, but it kind of ramps up a little bit at the start and then flattens. So the larger the negative, the smoother that line is. So it gets it closer to coil, which is what you want. And that's why a lot of older air springs, like they felt soft off the top, but they kind of felt a bit crap in the travel. And it was just that little ramp up. So that increased the negative space tremendously. But these air assemblies were the way they top out, which is when you get to your max amount of travel, is these would pneumatically top out. So when the air moved in, the air would fill up between the two seals, and it would actually push back, and it wouldn't actually hit the top out bumper on these. So they were really soft, but what people were finding is they could dive a little bit too much. And it's because the way it ramped up when you pushed into the travel kind of put more air into this and sat you in the travel more. I was actually personally a big fan of this. It was really nice and smooth, but some people found it dived a little bit. So what they did was create the Debonair C1, which has just changed where the seals sit in relationship to the dimple. So this one sits pretty much straight on the dimple and equalizes straight away. So there's no pneumatic top out. It'll physically top out on the bumper. But the lower seal head and the lower foot nut have gotten bigger to allow for that space. So this is the same as that increase from this to this. And effectively, they'll sit in the fork at the same height. This one will just top out on the bumper. This one will pneumatically top out, but it'll just change this where the spring works. So in essence, these are the same, and all that actually changes is the seal head. So you can buy just a seal head and just the foot nut if you want it to sit up a little bit higher in its travel. But that's pretty much all you're doing with all the new airspring stuff. You're just putting more negative air in them. So, and your negative air, for people who don't, it's a rabbit hole we could talk about it for half an hour, but the best way I find to talk about negative spring is it's like having a spotter at the gym. It just helps you, say someone's doing a bench press, it helps you get into the movement more. So it allows there to be no breakaway and allows the first part of the travel to be nice and smooth.
So I'm against calling that an upgrade. I'm more of calling it a tunable part or something. It's like spaces, right? Like if you want, you can run either one. I feel like Shamp calling it an upgrade was a little bit misleading.
Yeah, I think that's kind of the only way you could say that it is.
Yeah, okay.
Just because like that one's now the norm and that one isn't. But I was the same. Like I wouldn't say that this was a downgrade. Like I actually quite like this. I prefer this, but I didn't think that this had issues. And honestly, I didn't know many people who did. The only issues I heard from people was they'd freak out because the fork would sit in its travel, like about 5%. And everyone's like, I'm losing travel. And it's like, well, no, because when you de-weight the bike, you're going to full travel. But it's sagging under its own weight, which isn't a bad thing. So you're not losing travel. That was kind of the only complaint I heard. But, yeah, I wouldn't say that the new ones